Hello there, kia ora. One of the simplest tricks I've come across from dodgy politicians trying to manipulate voters and narratives around costs is to take really complicated and scary sounding things and oversimplify them, losing nuance and, misleading followers. A great example of that is actually around infrastructure costs like building crossings or speed bumps. The sort of activity that the former Minister of Transport used to conflate and make everything safety related sound scary. And a number of local body politicians around the country use the same tactic to try and sway voters as we see rates increase. Take this post, which showed up on the Waipa Residents and Ratepayers page, about the shocking cost of a single raised crossing outside one of Hamilton's busiest pedestrian access points near a main arterial route and schools. The post is originally from disinformation peddling Andrew Bidder, so that should already be a bit of a red flag. After all, the executives of the Hamilton Residents and Ratepayers Association, the one that made headlines a couple of years ago for issuing pseudo-law execution writs for sitting councillors over 15-minute cities, they emailed me a couple of weeks ago to point out that they consider him deranged. And he's teamed up with Liz Gunn, making videos about trying to save the country. He wrote an 18-page novel about taking councils back from quote-unquote woke indoctrination by flooding the zone and winning all the elections. He went on Reality Check Radio to talk about that and then turned around on this particular thread and asked for sources when I pointed out that that's what he'd done. It was kind of weird. His followers said that I was getting all emotional. Apparently that's an insult, and I'm not a Cyberman. I don't find my emotions insulting. Anyway, he is kind of right in that $950,000 does seem like a lot to pay for a single raised pedestrian crossing. That's why the actual cost of this whole thing is $750,000 and it's not a raised crossing at all. The number he used was actually the price of a house nearby that he used to show the value of $950,000. And if people had read more than the first paragraph in the post, they would have seen that he actually does say further down the line that the cost is $750,000. But, why would you do that? This thing isn't going to cost what he's told them it's going to cost. It's going to be 200 grand less than that, and there's like a 5% variance in expected cost. So it's at the most, it will cost $750,000. But, facts, who needs them? Anyway, it does raise a complicated question that the common sense thinkers in this group who support these kind of candidates struggle with. Not why does somebody in the Waipa care about the cost of a crossing in Hamilton that they're not paying for, but is being pushed by someone who is running his own local Waipa ticket, so wanting people there to see a specific spin. No, they're asking why does it cost so much, which, does, I guess, seem fair when you think it's $200,000 more than it's actually going to be. Anyway, they will argue things like inflation's only at 2.5%. I mean, Andrew did that himself. By the way, he doesn't mind me making fun of him. He actually said he's feeling special when I do that. Anyway, he said 2.5% inflation rate. So why does this cost so much more than it used to? So I guess we could take a look at that. I mean, the Consumer Price Index, which is inflation on what average consumers purchase, like food, power, rents, that's at 2.5%. But every sector has a different inflation rate based on issues which are impacting that sector directly. Like the strength of the economy or the constraints of supply. The cost of labor and inflation rates are they're kind of timey-wimey. It's a measure of past costs given a stamp in time, so it's more a guide for tracking changes than a definitive this is what things should cost statement. But, we can dive in a little bit deeper on that. If we take a look at the CPI in 2021, just as the war in Ukraine hit and COVID was going to sort of just start making its self felt around the rest of the world, well, our inflation rate was just over 3%. But for the infrastructure sector, it was almost 6%. The highest that our CPI got was, in the past 6 years, 7.3% in 2022. And the infrastructure sector has got up to 12% at the same time. But here's the kicker. In 2019, building and infrastructure materials actually kept going up in costs due to supply chain constraints, strong demand internationally, rising labor costs for production, and a limited domestic production ability that we've got here. And then COVID hit, which impacted China first. The world's largest producer and exporter of the resources needed for a lot of infrastructure projects, and one of the world's largest investors in infrastructure, which meant that while our domestic CPI rate at the time was just 1.7%, the inflation rate for the infrastructure industry by the end of 2019 was 41%. And those prices don't often reduce because most of the factors causing the increases still exist. Inflation is about how quickly prices increase, but the last time that there was a decrease over the last 6 years, in fact, the only time there was a decrease over the last 6 years in prices, was at the end of 2024. And now we have US tariffs coming into play. It's really hard to predict what we're going to be seeing over the next sort of 12 to 24 months in terms of inflation within the sector directly. But one estimate has around 2.8% this year, 2.4% next year, to lower CPI rates in this country for everybody else. But again, tariffs, so who actually knows what's going to happen there? Anyway, building materials alone saw a 5 to 6% increase in costs in 2022, with an 11% increase on material costs. The cost of international air transport went up 6.6% in June 2024. And sometimes we use that to bring in some of the smaller bits of technology that might be needed for these infrastructure projects. We actually import quite a bit of material for those infrastructure projects. Machinery and technology, for example, they come from the United States and China. And for roading projects, we import 100% of all of our bitumen, which means that we have to plan for current projects using stockpiles that were paid for under the higher inflation rate. So we're still dealing with costs under previous rates, and yeah, those costs hang around for a little bit. And, the sector faced labour shortages as well over the past half a decade, which drives up labour costs. In 2024, Nick Leggett, the chief executive of Infrastructure New Zealand, pointed out one of their reports, I think it was, that we need to work more than double the current rates of projects over the next 30 years to meet a 100-year deficit in investment on infrastructure. And the infrastructure industry is actually less financially efficient than other sectors because there's a low return on equity and total assets and surpluses on employee costs than you'd find in something like wider construction, which means less players in the field, which means less competition to drive costs down because there's already no room for movement there. And according to AP News, events like Cyclone Gabriel and the Christchurch quake has led to an increase in scrutiny around enhancements for infrastructure projects, which increases the costs. And all of those constraints, they lead to increased delivery costs as projects are prioritized and resources are distributed. Before that, there's actually a lot of work that goes into making sure a change like putting in a crossing is fit for purpose, like working out exactly what sort of crossing it needs to be. Waka Kotahi has 11 different options for people. They're in this weird little chart. It's all hand-drawn. It's kind of strange. But you've got to identify which one is going to be best for the specific needs of the new crossing. And council can't know which options are going to be the best 100% until the local school finished their entrance redesign, which was happening at the same time. They're going with the advice of experts, so it's not going to be a raised crossing because it's too close to other connection points. And if Andrew had been at the briefing on the topic, he might have known that. But he wasn't. Then before you make changes to the road, engineers and experts need to ensure the location will work, look at what safety features will be required, identifying and sourcing the right materials, planning for proper drainage and accessibility, traffic and pedestrian management, site excavation, road surface grading, base prep, formwork, paving and surfacing, curb modifications, signage safety inspections and sign-offs. They all take time because making a road isn't like making instant pudding that sets really fast, and the time costs money. Experts, resources, safety features for those working on it and those around it. It all costs. So to build a crossing is never as simple as just piling some asphalt, and we are still dealing with the aftermath of COVID responses, the Ukraine war, US export policy and tariffs, and their long-term impacts on supply chains. And you know what? We're currently tanking the economy, making our dollar weaker next to our trading partners, meaning these things cost us more. The fact is, building this stuff costs a shitload more than it did 6 years ago, and no local councillor or politician in the country is going to be able to change that. And any hopeful councillor this local body election promising otherwise, well, they're just wrong. It would be like you walking into Macca's and saying, hey, when I was a teenager, Big Macs cost $2.50, and sure, they may now be 4 times that price, but I don't see how that happened, and I don't think it's my problem. Now, no one likes that these things cost so much. No one enjoys seeing their rates bill go up. But councils only have a finite income level and limited levers on how to raise funds. Most people realize this, and the only people who are really misleading voters on this kind of topic are doing it because they want to scare voters into thinking that they're the bastion of fiscal responsibility. That or they're just plain stupid and don't understand what it is that they're saying. Could be either option sometimes. Hey, thanks for checking out today's video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you get more updates as we go along. We deal with these guys for the rest of the year.